Hello and welcome to Reimagining Love. I'm Dr. Alexandra Solomon. I have been studying relationships for over 20 years as a couples therapist, a professor, an award-winning author, and as a wife, mother, daughter, sister, and friend. Now, I'm inviting you into this space each week as I dig into some of the toughest and most fascinating relational dilemmas of our time. If you want to discover how to create vibrant and loving relationships in your own life, you have come to the right place. This is Reimagining Love. Hi there, and welcome back to Reimagining Love. Today's conversation is near and dear to my heart. It's all about identity, how the macro and societal affects the micro and the personal. It's about how we love across difference and about the shifts that we can make inside ourselves to change our relationships for the better. And our guest today is the really, really wonderful Sahaj Kohli. She's an award-winning therapist and a mental health educator. She's the founder of Brown Girl Therapy, the first and largest mental health and wellness community organization for adult children of immigrants. She's a columnist for the Washington Post's advice column, Ask Sahaj, and the author of the book, But What Will People Say? Navigating Mental Health, Identity, Love, and Family Between Cultures. Sahaj is also the host and creator of the new podcast, So We've Been Told. In our conversation today, we discuss the numerous identity tensions that exist for first-generation children of immigrants and what comprises, quote unquote, immigrant mentality, and then the challenges of bringing immigrant mentality into a Western workplace. We talk about how healing can happen through joy and leisure and play. We talk about how hyper-individualized and Eurocentric the field of mental health can be, and then also some considerations to help you find the right therapist and figure out what you need to get out of a therapy relationship. Sahaj does this really beautiful job of putting us into the shoes of both the children of immigrant parents and the parents themselves, and she does it in an incredibly compassionate and empathic way. She also talks about her observations as a cross-cultural couple therapist, plus her own lived experience in an intercultural, interracial, long-term intimate relationship. I know that you are going to get something important out of this conversation. It's going to help you feel ready to move through differences and misunderstandings with a greater capacity for curiosity and openness and patience and love. So without further ado, here's my conversation with Sahaj Kohli. Sahaj, thank you so much for taking the time to be here with me today. I'm excited to have you on.
I'm so excited to be here.
I was going to say the last time I saw you, but it also was the first time that I saw you. First time that I met you in person was in DC at this year's Psychotherapy Networker, where you won a really, really prestigious award, the Vanguard Award, which celebrates an early career professional who is just doing good and beautiful work in the world. And I got to connect with you in the lobby when you were there with your parents and your husband. And it was so... Oh, it was just so exciting to get to give you a little squeeze, and that award was so richly deserved.
Thank you. It was so nice to meet you in person, and that was such a whirlwind of a weekend, honestly. I feel like there was, it was the first time I was attending the Networker generally, and then I was also presenting, and then I was winning the award, and it felt, not that I need external validation, but it felt very much like a reminder that I was doing what I was meant to be doing, and it was being recognized.
Oh, really neat.
Yeah.
Did you have to do some kind of internal, what did you have to do inside of yourself to receive all of that? I think that we sometimes underestimate the challenges around stretching and making space inside of ourselves for the good stuff. Was there anything you had to do to kind of get ready to meet that moment?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I even said it in the speech. I was like, as a child of immigrants, I don't know how to celebrate my successes. And so even just taking that pause as I was making my speech to say, I want to take a second right now in this moment as I receive this award to receive this award. And I think that was just really special for me. I'm really glad I did that. And, even now I will grab it off the wall and be like, "Oh my God, I did this," which is so special. But it's also just me like reminding myself that celebrations don't need to be just a second. They don't need to be, they're not just one moment in time. We are allowed to look back and really honor all the work we've done.
That's such a great reminder. That it was, yes, there was a timestamp on that award in that moment, and you get to circle back to it and really savor it in an ongoing way.
Yes, yeah, definitely.
Sahaj, can you help us make that connection even more tightly between your identity as a child of immigrants and maybe some growth and healing you're doing around celebrating success? Can you talk us through that a bit more, please?
Yeah, as a daughter of immigrants, I'm the first in my family to be born in the West. So, I am paving the way for my nephews, my niece, everyone who's growing up in the West, born in the West after me, of just straddling these multiple different cultural systems that I am a part of. And I didn't have the language growing up for that. I always felt like there was this tension between being too much in my Indian identity, being too much in my American identity, being not enough of either of those. And it's only through the work as a therapist that I've done that I'm like, oh, this is called bicultural straddling. There's language for this. Any of us who exist between cultures have experienced this. But one of the most prominent ways that I see this coming up for children of immigrants, especially with myself, is that when it comes to success, right? So many immigrants, and the narratives around immigrants is that they come to the West, they come to America for the American dream. They are putting their head down. They're taking the path that will give them the most kind of stability, safety, security. That's how my parents were. Every decision they made for us as their kids was wrapped up in those three S's: safety, stability, and security. And as their kids, we were also expected to then make decisions that would prioritize those three S's. That meant then, not prioritizing creativity, that self-care was kind of luxurious and frivolous, that we needed to education was most important in the traditional sense, that there were certain career paths that were tried and true for like being on that path to success and stability. And then, of course, safety, putting your head down, not rocking the boat, doing what's expected of you. I think those are narratives that so many of us inherit and are passed down. We've witnessed our parents engaging in behaviors that will protect them, make them feel safe. And then those are passed down to us. And sometimes it's small things, right? Like when I was working in my first career, I really wanted to ask for a raise. And I remember my immigrant dad saying, why? You're already making money. Don't rock the boat. What if you ask and then you get let go? What if you're seen as difficult? So something as small as that, right? Whereas in the West, we're told just ask. If the answer's no, the answer's no. Just assert yourself. It's rewarded if you assert yourself. So there's small ways, communication ways, cross-cultural communication behaviors that come up in the workplace and when it comes to success. And a lot of my work is doing corporate consulting, corporate speaking engagements for children of immigrants in the workplace to understand how they are acting in ways that maybe they've inherited or learned from generational trauma or learned from cultural values that are not being seen or even being invalidated in Western workplaces.
Hmm. You write in your fantastic book, But What Will People Say? You write about when you're doing corporate trainings, you will ask attendees, what does like immigrant mentality mean to you? And it's really important for you to help people, not just those who are children of immigrants, but also those who are working with children of immigrants to understand what does that mean. And you write that there are some key words and phrases that come up again and again that are attached to what immigrant mentality means. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So the immigrant mentality is often just the mindset, the values, the survival strategies that I think immigrants have to adopt in order to succeed. Again, going back to those three S's. And again, that becomes learned, it becomes passed down, it becomes just a part of operating in the world. And some of the words that are attached to that are hustle, right? Hustle culture, being resilient. Not that resilience is a bad thing, but again, people of marginalized groups are expected to be more resilient. And, instead of us addressing the systems we exist in or what they're being resilient for or what the experiences are. Survival is a big one. Hard work. So then the narratives that get passed down, and I keep using the word narrative because I practice as a narrative therapist. So I'm really fascinated with our word choice, with the stories, with the narratives we learn. And so we learn survival over self-care, right? You prioritize work, you prioritize sacrifice above everything else, rest, emotional needs, fulfillment. Stability is more important than happiness. Hard work equals your worth. You start to learn your worth through hard work. So take my parents, for example. They were only allowed in this country after the civil rights movement, after certain immigration laws passed. And my dad had to show his worth to the economy. He's a doctor. He was able to say, look, I will provide something to your economy. I will be able to offer something economical for you. So that narrative is then passed down as your hard work equals your worth. What you can do, how much you can hustle, how much you can achieve. You take pride in it. It's not a bad thing, but it becomes your self concept in a lot of ways. Family before self, right? Immigrants move to the West and they start to create insular communities, insular family systems. It's why we see more enmeshment in immigrant families because they're trying to protect their own. So that community, that family needs to be more important than yourself, right? You have a strong sense of duty, of loyalty, and that can be logistical labor, right? Translating, caregiving, giving back, but also just inherently like putting others before yourself. And I'd say the last common one is the scarcity mindset. There's this idea that there's not enough of something to go around. So if we made it, we need to be grateful that we made it. If you have a certain job, you need to be thankful that you have it. So don't look for anything else. Don't risk losing what you already have, right? So job safety, time, love, all of these things are limited. We're taught that you take what you can get, and that should be enough. So you become risk averse. You oversave. You feel this pressure to stay on a safe path, to take chances as they come rather than deciding that it's not the right time. So these are the ways that I think that immigrant mentality gets passed down and reiterated through generations.
And that was why when you were standing on that stage receiving the award, you really had to you had to and you got to like take that breath and really like take that moment in. And I loved it because as you were doing it for yourself and then you were also modeling something that is so then inherent in the work that you do. You were modeling that for everybody in the audience.
Yeah, and I specifically asked my parents to come because it's a double-edged coin or a double-sided coin almost where I want to honor the work that the choices they've made that led me here, right? I'm allowed to do this work because they've made choices that allot me certain privileges and resources and opportunities. And I wanted to give it back to them and say, look, the work I do is about rest. It is about joy. It's not about constant striving. And so I'm constantly trying to unlearn, right? Like we're all reaching for the next milestone. So part of my work is me holding myself accountable and saying, when does it feel like enough? I also want to rest. A part of breaking those generational cycles isn't doing more than what our parents had access to. Sometimes it's doing less. And it's resting and it's joy and it's ease and it's leisure. And it's all these things that are deeply uncomfortable. So part of my work is also just reminding myself and them of that.
Yeah, I got that. Where I was sitting, I was like a tennis match, like watching you give your speech, watching your parents, back to you, back to your parents. I had like such a prime seat to just watch all of what was like transpiring between all of you. Sahaj, I got going on all of that, and I want to now circle back and ask you the question that I ask all of the guests on the show, which is the relational self-awareness question. So let's pivot to that for a moment, if you don't mind.
Of course.
Okay. How can you talk a little bit about how you are reimagining love in one of your important relationships these days?
Yeah, I love this question. I love that you ask this, and it really makes me I'm going to keep it on my immigrant parents. I think I'm constantly reimagining love in that relationship. And I think a part of being a child of immigrants is unpacking that generational, cultural, emotional gaps that exist in our relationship. So part of me reimagining love with my immigrant parents is recognizing the ways that they showed me love. They didn't say I love you, and it's something I deeply have always wanted from them, but I can now honor, the provisional care they gave, the action, the acts of service, the food, the sacrifice, the worry, and the ways that they've been able to show me love. I think I grew up always feeling like this angsty teen who was like, my parents won't understand me. I live between cultures. Like they don't get it. They're not curious. And I think today I'm able to reimagine love by seeing their silence, not as rejection, but as survival. I'm able to let go of some of that resentment and tell myself like, I want to have compassion and curiosity for what they went through. So I can reimagine love today by putting questions back on them and saying, what was it like for you? What was your relationship like with your parents? What were you hoping for when you moved to this country? Sharing more of those stories. I think that's something that gives us a way to rebuild a new type of relationship that we've never had.
Oh, that's very powerful. As you have been able to do that for yourself, for your own healing, but also as a way of connecting with them differently, how have they changed and grown?
I mean, it's so powerful, right? People ask me all the time, especially in the child of immigrant community, what's the point of me doing the work if my parents won't do the work? I'm not the one who needs therapy. They're the one who needs therapy. And I'm proof of the fact that you can change your relationships by changing the way you engage in those relationships, right? Like, I was able to go to therapy on and off for 10, 12 years. I'm still in therapy, learn tools, learn skills. I didn't always have a good relationship with them. I didn't have one that was rooted in this mutual respect, curiosity, kindness. I didn't have compassion. I was just frustrated. And my therapy journey taught me skills for how I can protect my, sense of self when I'm in relationship with them, the not getting defensive, the understanding my triggers, the understanding where they're coming from, the perspective taking, having different tools for communication. And just by showing up differently, you by default change the relationship. And I think that I have been able to do that with them, even if they haven't really done anything different, right? If they haven't really changed, they've been able to respond differently because I respond differently. And I think the reimagining love part of me trying to just have a different type of relationship now, as I've gotten older, as they're aging, it's just incorporating play into our relationship. So every time I go home, I'm like, I ask them the kinds of things they did when they were younger, playing carom, which is an Indian board game, or playing cards. And I'll play cards with my mom. I'll ride bikes with my dad. I'll try to find ways to make things feel more lighthearted, something I never got as a kid from them. And it's kind of healing to my inner child, but I realize it's healing to their inner children. They were so young when they got married. My mom was 18. My dad was early 20s. They were basically bred to get married and have kids. So they didn't even have the childhood joy or leisure or play. And by being able to integrate that into our relationship now, I'm healing my inner child. I'm healing their inner children. And I get to like rewrite stories I have of our relationship. Instead of it feeling serious and strict and controlling and suffocating, it's expansive and light and full of laughter. I hear my mom's belly laugh, or my dad does a funny dance because he feels so much more. They say children are more silly when they feel safe in the household. And I can see that in the relationship with me and my parents. We both feel so much more safe that we're like sillier, we're more playful. And it's amazing. It's beautiful.
You are creating healing that goes in both directions of your lineage. You talked before about your work offering something different to the next generation in your family, your nieces and nephews, but you're also talking about your work healing up the generational tree, that your parents, the work that you have done and continue to do offers healing to your parents' inner children. It's beautiful. I think it's a really good reminder to like folks who are drawn to the Reimagining Love podcast that certainly the hard conversations are an avenue for healing. But what you're reminding us of is that play and levity and curiosity, that's also healing. You maybe are not directly talking about ways in which you felt invalidated or unseen or, that they were misattuned to you. You aren't talking directly about that, but you are tending to those feelings inside of yourself through play, through the curiosity that you're able to show them. So those are also tools of healing.
Yes,
Mhm.
absolutely. And, another question I often get is, gosh, why am I the one who has to carry the burden to do more of the work in the relationship? And to that, I always say, it can feel like a burden, but it's also a privilege. Like I know, when I think about generational trauma, we are not far off. Like for me and my generation, especially South Asians or Punjabis or Pakistanis, right? The partition of India was 1947. That was literally just 2 generations ago. My grandparents lived through that. They were refugees because of that. My parents are children of refugees. I am then a kid of my parents who also immigrated twice over to the West as the only ones in their family. That generational trauma is really fresh. It is we have not come so far from that. And so, a lot of the work is just it's got to be culturally responsive in that way. There's no way I can sit down with my parents and say, let's talk about boundaries and feelings. I'm setting a boundary. It would go way over their head. It would lead to more conflict. So instead, it's like, what are ways we could connect? What are ways I can communicate, maybe without even using my words? What are ways that we can bond and be together? Because they didn't have that. Their parents didn't have that. And so when I think about that question of like, why am I the one to have the burden? I'm like, I also am the first one, literally the first one in my family generationally, who even has the chance to hold so many more, to even hold or have capacities for so many more emotions or resources and opportunities to do that work. So, yes, it's a burden. It's heavy sometimes. It's exhausting. I mean, that's a sign that maybe you need self care if you're exhausted, but like, it's also a privilege because no one before me literally could do it. They could not do it. They didn't have the access, resources, opportunities, ability, time, any of that.
You know what that also takes me to is that so often in a situation like that, what it feels like to the younger generation is my parents, my parents aren't doing that work. And if my parents loved me more, they would do that work. Like it feels really personal. And in the entire framing that you just gave, it is not personal. It's not a parent's inability to see those wounds in you is not personal. They're not willfully closing their eyes. It just isn't anything. It is a new language to them. It is a new, it's just not how they grew. It's nothing that they were able to access when they were younger. So it helps, like that framing really helps the younger generation take it less personally, perhaps.
Yeah. And it's, it's generational, it's cultural, emotion regulation, emotion, like talking about emotions, emotional literacy. Those are all culturally contextual as well. Right. And I think it's really important for us to know that. So, like, if I identify even more, a little bit more American or Western than my parents do, contextually, culturally, the way I think about emotions, it's going to just look different. So I can't hold them to that same standard and say, well, now you should tell me you love me. You should say I'm sorry because this is what I expect as someone who might be more Western in the way I think about emotion regulation. Whereas for them, saying I love you is cutting fruit. Saying I'm sorry isn't saying I'm sorry. It's changing their behavior next time without acknowledging it. Right. So it's like even understanding if we are holding our parents to the same standard we have held ourselves to growing up in a different cultural context, there's always going to be a misunderstanding or a mishap in the relationship. And I think that that's just really important for people to understand.
I mean, we're talking here, this is about mental health, and this is oftentimes the way that children of immigrants kind of come to these realizations. Well, it is certainly through reading your book and your beautiful Instagram feed, Brown Girl Therapy, but oftentimes it is in the quiet, sacred space of a therapist's office that a child of an immigrant is starting to have these awarenesses, making these connections. Can you talk a little bit about how basically Eurocentric and hyper individualized the field of mental health has been? And then maybe the progress that you are seeing and part of and helping therapy offices be spaces to start to do this work.
Yeah. I mean, as you said, right? I mean, I have my master's degree. I'm a therapist. I was also trained from a very Eurocentric lens, but even the like process of therapy has existed long before we have shaped it into what it is in the Western world, which is like individual, confidential space, all of that. And so even challenging that is really important. But the tools, the techniques, all of those things have been normed in the Western world by, white men for white people. And so when I say white people, I mean like that those are the bodies that have been used for these experiments, for these surveys, for the research that has been done. So we want to be mindful of that because that's a cultural piece, racial piece that we are then missing from some of these theories, techniques, tools, assessments, evaluations we've been taught to use that are quote unquote evidence based, right? Evidence for who? Based on what population? These are questions we need to ask. And it's important for us to know, like, we have to challenge our own assumptions. If you're listening and you're not a therapist, all of us need to do this. We need to challenge our assumptions of what is normal. What does it mean to be close? What is healthy? There's not one right way to define those words. Normal usually means normal because it's normed for people in the Western world, which predominantly has meant white Americans, white Europeans, right? It's Eurocentric, it's colonial in nature. So we have to challenge that thinking. What I might think is normal for me and healthy for me, someone else might hear that my parents open my mail that I get at their house and say, that is so disrespectful. And I'm like, that's super normal for me. My parents open my mail. It doesn't matter. Like, that doesn't bother me. So we can't make assumptions like that. That's such a non-serious example, but there are ways that we make assumptions on people and families.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yep.
So first challenging that, right? If I were to assume that there's a right way to communicate, then if I'm communicating with someone from a different cultural background, I might keep focusing on our relationship or them as a person from a deficit lens. Therefore, I start to pathologize. Okay, well, they're not making eye contact. Therefore, they must have some form of anxiety or they might be dealing with crippling self-doubt. But what if that's a cultural difference? So we want to be mindful of how not only does those biases and assumptions hinder us from being able to culturally see, differences in the ways people engage or interact or show up, but then it causes us to start putting judgment on it and approaching different people from deficit lenses rather than strengths-based frameworks, which is like the work I try to do, which is that we all kind of have our strengths as individuals from different cultures, the ways we communicate, and healing does not look the same for everyone. Mental health does not mean the same thing for everyone. Whereas we might in the Western world have been taught or modeled what, mental health to be more focused on illness and pathologizing and diagnoses and the individual. In other cultures, it's collective, it's intergenerational, it's spiritual, it's religious, it's energy, it's different things depending on who you ask and where they come from. And so I think just challenging that is part of the work I do when I train clinicians, when I, try to speak to other clinicians. It's more about just challenging that, broaching, having curiosity, being willing to ask questions rather than make statements, right? So we have to honor cultural ways of healing. We have to normalize interdependence. We have to make language accessible. I've heard from people in the community tell me, like, I was seeing a therapist and they just started using all these like therapy clinical words, right? That it's trauma, it's this, they were diagnosing me, they were telling me something was abusive. And maybe for their lens it is, and maybe the client needs time to get around to that. Or maybe they were making assumptions on something that isn't, right? So we want to be mindful of language. So, I try to practice this in my own work. Instead of using trauma response words like, hey, you might be in fight or flight, I might be like, how is your body still struggling to think, with the way that your parents survived? Or we want to think about the context in which they grew up, in which they have inherited certain things. So yeah, I think, validating those forms of feeling, asking a lot of questions, and really challenging our assumptions is key.
It really is a both and for you. It is the last thing we would want to do is say that because you are an immigrant yourself or the child of an immigrant, this world of therapy can't be for you because it is steeped in Eurocentric ideas. It is the job of the field of therapy to continue to evolve. And it is the job of all of us to know that therapy is right, the way that therapy looks in this moment is one way of healing. And it is certainly not the only way of healing.
Absolutely. I love that. Yeah, that's exactly it, right? I love the work I do as a clinician, and I know I can't make assumptions about any of my clients. And that's not to say that everyone has the same goals, right? I might work with a child of immigrants who does crave independence and autonomy and agency, and that's the work we do. But I don't want to make that assumption and say, hey, because you're also Indian and I'm Indian, this must be exactly what you need because we share the same identity. It's just broaching and curiosity are just key. Just keep asking. That's what cultural humility is for us to just stop being certain in what we think and start asking questions about what it means to the other person.
One of my favorite parts of your book is like how is all of the guidance that you offer to your reader about finding a therapist, about conversations with your therapist about culture. So can you just talk a little bit about like what you would want the child of an immigrant to keep in mind as they are looking for a therapist? Because you're really clear that it's not just, there are ways that a cultural match can be very powerful and so healing. And there are ways that when a therapeutic relationship bridges a cultural difference, the responsibility is on the therapist to do the bulk of the, practicing cultural humility and having themselves trained really appropriately and well. But that wouldn't be necessarily a rule out to be in a therapeutic relationship that bridges a cultural difference. So what are the things that feel really important to keep in mind?
I mean, I don't know if this is considered a hot take. I know people in the community have very strong feelings one way or another based on their own experiences, but I do not think you have to share in your identity with your therapist in order to heal and get help from a therapist, right? To do good work in therapy, I don't think you need to have the same identity. Um, and I know that people sometimes feel more comfortable with people who look like them, share an identity, can understand certain things. And of course, comfort. And, that's like the number one indicator of success. We both know. So it matters. If it matters to you, be honest with yourself. If it doesn't, there are questions you can ask your therapist, right? I think for the most part, every therapist offers a free consultation to get to know you, to like talk about logistics, to talk about the way they work. You can use that time. And I think people forget you're interviewing someone you're also going to be paying someone to do a service for you. So approach it that way. Like the same way you would hire a graphic designer, you wouldn't just pick the first graphic designer you find. You'd look at their work, you'd see their style, you'd make sure the aesthetic fit. You would do all of these things. But I think people approach finding a therapist sometimes like finding a medical doctor, right? Well, if they specialize in this one issue, they should be able to help me. But the thing is that as therapists, we all practice different modalities. We all bring different parts of ourselves to the work. We all have different specializations. There are certain things I'm not comfortable working with because I don't have specialization in it, or it's not something I'm familiar with. So we want to be able to be asked these questions. So if you are concerned about culture identity, you can ask, have you ever worked with someone who has my culture? Have you ever worked with someone who has struggled with X? If not, how will culture be integrated into the work? What specialties and certifications do you have? How do you incorporate identity and culture into your work? You can ask these things and you'll learn a lot by how they respond. They might be like, I don't even think about it. And that can be your cue. Okay, maybe this isn't a fit for me. Or they might answer it in a very positive way. And you might say, okay, even though they have a vastly different background, or, this is a white man and I didn't think I'd ever want to see one, I feel very comfortable. And it seems like he will still be able to hold space and integrate my culture into our work. So I've seen therapists from all different backgrounds. My first therapist was a white woman. My second therapist was an Indian woman. My third therapist is a Chinese woman. So like, I know, and I think some people also need to remember not everything is about like cultural values and context is brought into maybe every struggle we have, but not everyone's in therapy for cultural issues. So like my first therapist, I sought her out because of a trauma I experienced. I didn't say, oh, it's important she understands my cultural context. I needed support with something very specific. So it really matters what people want to work on also. I think that changes how important it is for you to have a person who can integrate or understand your cultural identity and background.
I would just triple underline the part about having the conversation with your therapist about it. And then just really like having that, like that's your data point, is how does this conversation feel? And it is right to know that, especially if you occupy one or more minoritized identities, and then that's what you're bringing into the relationship, and the difference, then the therapist holds the privileged stance in the relationship. Like it is really important. Like how do they talk about it with you, and just feeling into your body? How does your body feel in that conversation? Because there can be something quite powerful about the like crisscrossing that cultural bridge and sort of talking about your cultural experience with somebody who has a different cultural experience. Like there might be something healing in that you don't even know about. And to your point, sometimes it just is, I need to be gotten in this way. At this moment, in this season, on this issue, I just want to feel gotten in this way.
Yeah, I want to triple underline that statement because I think that's such an important piece. Like people have reparative relationships in therapy with their therapist. And sometimes working with someone of a different background actually helps fuel that, right? I have clients who are white and we have had conversations about race, and that I am not, I'm a person of color and I'm not white. How do they feel talking about this with me? And I think that's been really useful for our work because I'm able to kind of gently confront and challenge that, and they're open to it and we can have conversations about it. And I think that's part of the work, is that this is a space that we can have that reparative or, address that kind of behavior or pattern or thinking with someone who looks like the person that they're talking about.
Okay, well, speaking of crisscrossing the bridge, you have heaps and heaps of empathy for the experience of children of immigrants as well as the experience of immigrant parents. So I would love to just spend some time like kind of in each of those positionalities. So if we imagine what feels most important for the children of immigrant parents to keep in mind about their parents? Like what are the things that you want children of immigrants to just hold in their hearts as they look at their parents, as they look at their relationship with their parents? I mean, I know we can't speak broadly about a huge group, but like what are the sort of, touchstones that feel particularly salient? And then we'll do the other direction. But start with the children.
I love this so much. Oh my God, there's so many things. I think the trauma and pain piece is important. Our parents are carrying and holding on to a lot of trauma and pain that they have not been able or don't have the skills to process, to heal from, to understand, to even identify. That gives me a lot of compassion for my own parents, where I'm like, wow, they just don't even realize that this is like a trigger for them, or this is like a coping skill for them. And that's okay. I don't need them to address that for me to be able to say, well, now that I know this and I can hold this as truth, I can approach it differently or have more compassion. So, really understanding that generational thread that exists for our immigrant parents. Migration, either whether it's choiced or forced, that displacement in itself is a huge experience. I will never know what it's like to be an immigrant. At the time, my parents were immigrants, not having access to technology in the way we do now, hearing that their parents died from a payphone when they had to call. Like, I will never know what that's like for them. I will never know what it's like, because at that time they didn't really have community here. They didn't have access. They left everything behind. And just understanding that even if they made that choice because they wanted to, there's a level of pain, again, and trauma that comes. There's that migratory loss, the cultural bereavement. Their family roles are now disjointed. My dad is the eldest son, and in South Asian households, that comes with a lot of responsibility. And he left that, and that like led to a lot of grief and guilt that he felt for that, right? So even having compassion of how they made these hard choices and it led to their own experiences. That gives me a lot of compassion, but it also lets me find parallels with my parents. So, an example of that, I think, is I've had clients say, my mom doesn't get it, that I am moving across the state to live with my new partner. And I will sometimes challenge that and be like, who better to understand what that experience is like than your mom, who got married at 15, had to move across the world and leave her family behind. I wonder if she's holding on to you tight because she knows what it's like to have to leave that behind. Who else to understand that experience? How can you bridge that? How can you find that parallel and communicate with your parent about the fact that they've actually had a similar experience and that you are now doing the same thing? So I think those things, I think like the goals are different, right? So I think when I do this work, a lot of times we just have to hold, we can't, I will never say every family is the same, but what I often see is immigrants and their children are playing the same board game with different rules. And so oftentimes the child is like, well, why don't they get it? Why aren't they saying the things that they mean? Why aren't they like changing the way they think about success? Because we've been living here for so long. Why are they pushing back? Why are they guilting me? And oftentimes we have to understand that you're not playing with the same rules. So you need to look at their rule book. We need to like think about, what is their rule book? What is it? How do they define success? Why do they do that? How do they communicate? Where did they learn that? How do they show love, even if it's not the way that you want them to show love? Just looking at their rule book can help you understand and actually expand your perspective of the relationship. This does not mean that things don't hurt, that you don't feel hurt, that you don't feel minimized. I get it. But I'm strictly speaking from just where you can bridge that and have compassion. I think those are kind of the major things I would say.
Oh, beautiful. Okay. Now please do
The
the
other
other one.
side.
Yeah. So what would you want to be whispering in the ears of parents, immigrant parents, and what you want them to remember as they look at their children who've grown up in another country and in different experience?
Man, I have this conversation with my parents a lot. I will never know what it's like to be an immigrant, but they will never know what it's like to be socialized and grow up in a completely new culture, but also racial landscape, right? I grew up in a very predominantly white area. We were one of only, we were one of few. What that did to my self-concept. I think for immigrant parents, I would say have a lot of curiosity for how your kids are engaging with their identities, whether it's religious or cultural or racial. I think instead of curiosity, a lot of immigrant parents tend to be like, this is what you should be doing. This is what you need to do. Have curiosity instead, because they really are growing up in a totally different landscape than what you grew up in. And I think that that's something that's really hard for immigrant parents to hold because they're so rooted in that cultural erasure, that fear that they made a mistake, that they are just, it comes off as control when in reality, that's just adding more hurt and grief and guilt to the child's experience. I mean, I think the curiosity piece is so important, but I think, again, it's like the rule book thing. They're not, you might try to hand down your rule book, but they are just playing by different rules because it's a different cultural system. And I just really, with that kind of compassion needs to go two ways.
Yeah, and the your kids playing by a different set of rules is not A, disrespect of all the sacrifice that you made, and B, it does not mean that you made a mistake. It doesn't mean that you made a mistake. They're neither disrespecting you nor proving that you did something wrong, even though in a moment, it can feel like that to an immigrant parent, right? That's the key.
Yes.
Hmm.
Yeah, it can feel like that. And, what I see a lot of times is that immigrant parents are like placing their own regrets, fears, concerns onto their kids. And it's like, well, now you have to make it worth it. The narrative for an immigrant is often like, well, I moved, I did all of this for you. Now you have to respect me. You have to make it worth it. You have to be making X amount of money. And the narrative for a kid is like, oh my God, my parents sacrificed so much. I'm never enough. It's never enough. I don't know if I'm good enough. I don't know if I'm doing enough. So those narratives are just like, they're at odds, but they're playing off of the same thing, which is like both people tend to love each other. Both people want happiness and success, right? They want the same things. It's just both parties are kind of like enveloped in their own like, I don't know, feelings. And it's hard. I used to do family therapy with immigrant families, and like a lot of the work was parents having to reparent themselves to heal from some of their stuff in order to then hear the kid, and then the kids having to have compassion for the parent, and then communication, right? Like communication was just so different. Well, this is what it means to be respectful. Well, this is what it means for me to feel seen. And it's like they're always contrasting. How do we find that middle ground?
Right, so one of the messages to the immigrant parent is, like, your sacrifice stands on its own. It would like, just trust, like, how incredible everything that you did to get to this point was on its own, no matter what happens next, no matter what your kid does with it, right? That's not none of your kids' behavior, thoughts, feelings is commentary on what you did. What you did was brave and sacrificing and amazing on its own as it is right now, yeah.
Yeah. And often, if you are holding your kid to like make it worth it, there's often unprocessed like guilt and grief that an immigrant parent is navigating that they haven't allowed themselves to feel because it's a whole nother can of worms, which is like suppression, right? Emotional suppression, not wanting to think about it, feel it, talk about it. So it's very multi-layered and complex.
Okay, well, before I let you go, I do wanna ask you a little bit about intercultural couples, which was, be an
Yes.
entire another podcast on its own, but I was thinking especially about couples where one partner is, maybe many, many generations in, let's say, here in the US, has been here for many generations, and another partner is the child of immigrants. What do you see as as some of the common challenges, and what do you want those couples to keep in mind?
I love this because I'm in an intercultural, interracial
Yeah.
relationship, and first in my family to be in one. So that has been its own ballgame. But I work as a cross cultural couples therapist. So specifically, only see couples who from different backgrounds, culturally, racially, and this is the heart of that work: is really bridging and making the implicit explicit. Oftentimes, people go into romantic relationships being like, if they love me, they'll know what I need. If they, it's this mind reading that's like, we all have that inner, the attachment styles, the things that we need and we want to feel loved and safe, but we have a hard time explicitly stating it or understanding where it comes from. And cross cultural couples are no different. And a lot of times making the implicit explicit is the like relational aspect, but it's the cultural aspect. Hey, when you see my family, I know my parents find X, Y, and Z disrespectful. Let's talk about it. How do you feel about that? What does it feel like to you? Do you agree? Would you be willing to do that? Here's why it's important to me, right? These are just making the implicit explicit rather than being like, just do it. It's a cultural thing, or just do it. You should know this, right? We want to just talk about it, that open communication. So in my work, I mean, some of the most common cross cultural issues I see is like this us versus them. So in Western couples, the mindset is more like when you get married, you are now a unit and it's you and your partner and whatever family you choose to have. The them is everyone else, your extended families, your parents, the friends, everyone else. But in some cultures, the us is my family, my parents, my siblings, me, you, your parents, your family, your siblings. We're an us. All of us are an us. And then the them is everyone outside of that family. And so that's a really common issue of like, where do we spend our holidays? How do we communicate with in laws? What is expected? Because there's this us versus them difference in how you think about relationships, family involvement, who you married. I married you, not your parents. Well, in some cultures, you are marrying the family. Money, sex, gender roles are three of the biggest issues I see. So, like money narratives, right? What we've been taught about money, how you handle money, gender narratives around money, all of that, because there is a lot of traditional, we're all a product of the patriarchy. So, that in heteronormative relationships, that comes up a lot. Sex and pleasure, and like being able to even talk about it or have it be rooted in pleasure rather than what's the purpose of sex, just having kids, duty, all of that is very common. And then gender roles, like what we've internalized around, especially in heteronormative relationships, around gender and the role of a wife and a husband, and what that means and how. For instance, I am in a marriage where I don't do the cooking and my parents are shocked at that. But, not only is my husband doing the cooking, which is a quote unquote woman's role in the family I grew up in, but it's helping me also understand that maybe I never wanted to learn how to cook because I saw my mom cooking every day, not being thanked for it, not necessarily wanting to do it. She doesn't even like cooking. And now I'm trying to return to that as something I want to do, not something I feel like I have to do. So it's something that can just change the way we think about our relationship and what we need and what we want. So I would say those are like the most common things I often see.
Absolutely. That idea of making the implicit explicit is so key. And I think oftentimes we are right. I mean, especially for those who are white and U.S. based, there's a fear in talking about difference, right? There's and there's just a lack of skill around talking about culture and the impact of culture and the impact of difference. And so, just having, and I feel like that's oftentimes so often where I start with my intercultural couples as well, is just naming it, bringing it into the room, like allowing us to talk about it together, and then who knows where we go from there, and just being curious. There's that. I was just teaching my undergrads a few weeks ago about like dynamic sizing, like where intercultural couples are forever flexing. Is this a me versus you thing? A my family versus your family thing? A my culture versus your culture thing? Like what is this conflict we're experiencing? And that's a skill. And no matter, you're never going to get an exact answer to that question, but the process of asking the question of how much of this is about me versus you, how much of this might have a cultural, thread through it, like just that meta exploration for a couple is intimacy promoting.
Oh my gosh. Yes, absolutely. I mean, my husband and I have to have these conversations regularly. We've been together for 9 years and we're not having them any less because I think having them is what keeps our relationship intimate, honest, safe for both of us. Right. If I wasn't able to say, hey, I wonder if this is like your white privilege to him, I don't know that I would feel safe in our relationship. And he's honest. Oh, I feel a little defensive or I feel like I need a second. That's fine. We're able to talk about it. We're able to like approach it from, like you said, that dynamic sizing just really hits home for me. It's really always like, is this me? Is this from my mom? Is this your family? Is this outside society? Is it something else? Like, where is this coming from?
What I hear in that example is it's between you and your husband is it's not about apologizing. It's not about apologizing or making one person wrong for the lens through which they look at this experience or this moment, right? It is about just honoring and being curious together about what might each of our blind spots be in this moment? What might each of our emotions or preferences or needs be about in this moment?
Exactly. Exactly.
Oh, okay. I feel like I just like picked your brain, just
I
picked
know.
because
I'm
you've got
like, there's so much we could talk about.
I know, I know. I feel like this is like part one of like a 10-part series. This has been so wonderful to connect with you. All of this work you're doing is so near and dear to my heart. And I'm so glad to have had a chance to be in conversation with you in this way.
I love it. And if you ever want to have another conversation, let me know.
Okay, I know now I know where to find you. You better watch out. Will you, so if this is somebody's first time hearing from you and hearing about your work, tell us where, we will have links in the show notes to Brown Girl Therapy, which is your incredible Instagram, well, your social media, your Instagram is where I read you, and links to your book. But what will people say? What else? How else do you want people to connect with you?
Yeah, I mean, Brown Girl Therapy is the main one, but Brown Girl Therapy kind of has its subsidiary. So there's the podcast that I have called So We've Been Told, which kind of challenges the stories we've all been told about wellness based on culture. There's my newsletter community on Substack called Culturally Enough, where I write essays and you also meet with other community members and come together. And then I would say Brown Girl Therapy is probably where you can be reminded of all of those things, including the book, because that's where I kind of post everything.
Great. That's great. All of that in the show notes. Thank you so much, Sahaj, for being here today.
Thank you so much. It was good to see you. I'll talk to you soon.
Good to see you too. Thank you, Sahaj, for this compassionate conversation. The way that you have reimagined how we might approach differences and tensions by putting down our deficit lens and integrating more curiosity and understanding and playfulness is incredibly refreshing. You can find the links to learn more about Sahaj Kohli's work, including where to buy her book, But What Will People Say? Navigating Mental Health, Identity, Love, and Family Between Cultures in our show notes. Until next time, be well. Thank you for listening to our show. Our producers are Elizabeth Vogt and Mary Chan and Katie Pagich of Organized Sound Productions. Our theme music was composed by Slade Warnkin. The show is executive produced by me, Dr. Alexandra Solomon. Do you have a relationship question that you want answered on the show? Visit reimagininglove.com to send in a written or audio question. Questions can be about intimate partnerships, family relationships, friendships, you name it. If you're looking for more love and relationship content, you can find me on Instagram at dr.alexandra.solomon or visit my website, dralexandrasolomon.com, where you'll find my blog as well as the Intimate Relationships 101 e-course based off of the popular class I teach at Northwestern University. Thank you for listening and see you next week here on Reimagining Love.